As we said in the news earlier in the show, Sega's Australian development arm has closed. It's the latest studio in a long line of once profitable businesses that have now shut their doors.
In the last year, the government, after many years of lobbying by the industry, has put in place an incentive to encourage local development. It's called the Research and Development Tax Incentive. Goose takes a closer look.
Before we can answer whether or not this will be a lifeline for Aussie developers, we need to find out what the Research and Development Tax Incentive involves.
So the Research and Development Scheme allows people who are doing research and development to get a tax offset.
From a small company perspective, being able to get assistance with anything that you're developing is incredibly important.
What we need to see a great deal more of is investment into the Australian industry, something we have sadly lacked for the longest period of time.
The incentive gives any company that's earning under $20 million per year a refundable 45% tax offset on all of its research and development costs. This R&D needs to be catalogued and documented just like a science experiment. You'll need to create a hypothesis, test and perform your experiment, then observe the outcomes before finally evaluating the results. This will potentially lead not only to developing new intellectual property, but also keeping that IP in this country, and hopefully resulting in better gaming experiences.
Look, I think the government does have a responsibility to see where the growth opportunities are across industry, and one of the ways we can support that is through broad-based incentives like the R&D tax incentive. The changes we've made are geared towards businesses of the future, and specifically for the game sector, I think a number of elements of our new R&D tax incentive will be incredibly helpful.
The federal government's gone out of its way to understand game production and game development and the entire culture of games. They've gone so far as to visit a large number of game development studios. They've spoken to a lot of game developers. They've certainly engaged a great deal with the GDAA in understanding what it is we can deliver culturally and economically to Australia. So I'd suggest, yes, they're at a point now where they have a very solid understanding of the game development process.
Out of bounds, on the full.
I think we're starting to see a really good sea change in the way that governments are starting to see the games industry. I think for a long time they were really able to dismiss it as a bunch of kids in a garage mucking around doing their own thing. I think they've suddenly realised it's $1 billion industry, which is actually bigger than the film industry globally, and that suddenly it's become a really important economic driver for the state and for the country. And I'd like to see that come up more in policy.
Will this scheme lead to a resurgence in the Australian game industry, or is it all just a bit too convoluted?
It is an onerous process, and that is the way with government grants. You know, this is taxpayers' money. When we first got involved in the process, we learned of the fact that it was going to be a self-assessed system. So there is a strong need for very heavy documentation. But again, this really talks to the maturation of those smaller indies. They shouldn't shy away from it. They should actually use it as an opportunity to grow the knowledge of their company and of the technology that they're creating.
The idea of the hypothesis and the examples and the proof that's required seems to be a big ask. I think that what's important for people is to know that the single most important thing to do is to log the hours and the costs that they have in doing the research and development work. And I think sometimes the hypothesis and seeing whether you've met that can come a bit later, but you do have to understand what you're getting into and not just go 45% tax incentive, I'm there, because it won't come unless you do the work for it.
I don't think any government program is going to be a magic bullet for any industry, and we really need a number of factors in place, including great participants in the industry. So whether or not this leads to good games, I think it should lead to us hanging on to our intellectual property in Australia, which should lead to more profits being kept in Australia, which should ultimately lead to greater reinvestment and good games. And whether or not it does that will really be up to the developers.
Looking forward, this could be the answer we need, but is the government's involvement actually welcomed by the industry?
So we're already generating a lot of content for a global audience every year. I mean, even without any sort of incentive systems, the games industry in Australia has survived against, what a lot of people consider all odds, and done really, really well. We've got some of the best-selling games in the world out there right now, done in very small studios locally. We're not looking for the government to intervene in the industry. What we're looking to do is create some sort of mechanism that encourages investment into game development so we can grow the industry. We're already sustainable. What we want to do now is grow, and that is why we seek government intervention.
So I think there needs to be, if you want a real embracing of the broadness of the gaming community and the gaming developing community, whether we're building flash games in Facebook or cute little games on mobile, all really big immersive things, I think engagement with us as an industry from the government, I think reducing the red tape for us to be able to apply for grants, and I think trying to work out that we actually aren't in the arts sector, we should be in the economic sector, because we're certainly growing jobs at the moment.
Well, my view is we do need a local games development industry, and there's a strong demand both in Australia and overseas for interactive gaming. So, of course, Australia being an innovative and exciting place, we should be part of that industry.
Good game.